Hey, what's up guys? So over the past several months, I started to pay more attention to the details in horror games and made a few videos about some of the creepy things I learned. One of them was about Outlast 2 and the deteriorating psychology of the main character, Blake Langermann. We see most of this in the form of intense hallucinations that take place in Blake's elementary school. If you haven't checked out that video, you can watch it right here. But when we come back to reality, we're in a dark, mysterious village with many deeply disturbed people who want to hurt us. Now most people, me included, kind of just accept the setting, it's a spooky village, whatever. But it turns out that as crazy as the things are that we're seeing, a lot of it is inspired by true events. And understanding where we are and what's going on will lead to a whole new perspective on the game. In case you don't remember, the story starts off with Lynn, Blake's wife, talking about an unknown girl, a Jane Doe that was found wandering alongside a highway, pregnant, barefoot, and alone.
I'm Lynn Langermann, here for newstomorrow.net. We're flying past the Havasupai Indian Reservation in central Arizona in search of the origins of murder victim Jane Doe.
I don't think you should say murdered.
We're flying over the general area she was found in hopes of finding clues as to what exactly happened to her. The helicopter crashes and we wake up in a village. When we walk around, we notice that things aren't quite normal. Frequently, we see pictures of a man. The way he's portrayed, he already looks like a religious figure, and when we hear him preaching, we can tell that he's very important. But what is this strange place? Who is this guy, and what happened to the girl? Outlast 2 does technically give us all the answers, but you really have to look carefully to understand it all. One thing we will talk about right away, because it's the point where all this begins, is the man in the pictures, Sullivan Noth, and is called Testament of the New Ezekiel.
The tide's too strong already. You've murdered paradise.
Even though the details surrounding Noth are a bit foggy, we know from the many in-game documents that he was born in the 1930s, and during the mid-1960s worked as a shoe salesman in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He had serious financial problems and in desperation turned to an evangelical radio station for solace. However, he didn't find any comfort in the typical preachings. Now this is where the story gets a little weird, but how we see Noth in the game later on, I don't doubt that this is what he actually believes. While listening to this religious radio station, he heard something underneath the static, which to him was the voice of God. This is fairly interesting because Blake actually notices something similar. There are certain parts of Blake's hallucinations that you can record, but if you play them back, all you get is static. But there's also a faint voice underneath it giving you special messages. Throughout this, we can get an idea of what Noth experienced. So the voice Noth heard told him that all the churches got it wrong and that there needs to be a brave new prophet. Then he walked outside and saw a vision of an angelic creature. During this, Noth was chosen as the new prophet who must lead a chosen few to paradise and save them from the end of days. He started preaching his gospel in the streets of Albuquerque with quite some success and gained an increasing number of followers to his church, which he called Testament of the New Ezekiel. One of his more wealthy followers even allowed for the church members to live on a ranch. Noth heavily encouraged the members to breed quickly and often lent a helping hand. The way I read this is that he donated his own seed for this noble cause. How very, very brave of him to make that sacrifice. This seems insane, but much like the first game, even though this story is fictional, it is inspired by reality. Now, the fact that Noth encourages members to fornicate a lot might be a reference to the Sullivanians cult, which was active between 1957 and 1991. Its leader, Saul B. Newton, was a psychotherapist who, together with his wife, founded the Sullivan Institute right in New York. The name came from one of the founders of Saul's previous place of employment, Harry Stack Sullivan, but the institute taught a very distorted version of what Sullivan believed. According to Saul B. Newton, the traditional family ideals were the root of all mental illness. This group slowly grew until they had several hundred members who were living in a building in the Upper West Side. Saul forbade members to have exclusive relationships, and any children that were born were sent off to boarding schools and had little to no contact with their parents. In Outlast 2, there's actually something similar going on. Let's look at the game again. Since people were shooting out babies left and right on this woman's ranch, the police got involved because apparently that's a health and safety violation. Who could have guessed? After that, the cult almost fell apart. All assets were seized and Noth was just barely able to escape. But then this guy climbs a mountain, naked, waiting for God to talk to him. As you do. The way the story goes is that God wanted a sacrifice of an eye in exchange for the true vision. So Noth cut his own eye open to see what he must do. This explains his physical appearance where one eye is always closed. Cutting his eye open led to a vision where Noth saw a town deep in the forest hidden away from the rest of society. He wanted to name this place Temple Gate because it was the gateway to the true temple of his church. This is all still in the 1960s, 1969 to be more precise. In 1971, in true American fashion, the cult went to a remote area which was part of a Native American reservation in the Arizona wilderness and just said, "This is ours now," forced the natives out and built this crappy town. But Noth's visions also tell him that the Antichrist will be born by one of his people. This leads to him killing a lot of babies in order to preserve Temple Gate's paradise. This is of course much more extreme than the Sullivanians cult, but the idea that babies are separated from their parents remains. This is what we see early on in the game at a strange-looking fence. There are photos of many babies with Blake saying,
"Tragedy wall, topped with barbed wire. I could feel tension in my skin. Somebody watching me."
The events that kickstart Outlast 2's story are the following. Noth sleeps with a lot of women in his cult. We already covered this noble act of his. And this leads to him impregnating a certain girl named Anna Lee. This is the daughter of the villager who decides to help us early on in the game. Anna, wanting to protect her baby from Noth, who probably wanted to kill it, decides to flee from Temple Gate, and she manages to escape successfully. Anna Lee is the Jane Doe mentioned in the beginning.
Didn't complain with Nah. Pressed himself on my Anna Lee. And she not but 15.
I'm sorry.
But when he said my grandson, baby he put in her, was my the Antichrist, and I had to slit her belly and kill the child.
The relationship between the 14 or 15-year-old Anna Lee and the much older Noth might also indicate parallels to the Children of God cult, which still exists today. I don't think I can speak too much about what exactly they believe, as I'm pretty sure YouTube would take down this whole video, not demonetize but like fully take down, but it's one of those really bad things involving children and general excessive baby making, which is exactly what Noth preaches, and is generally found in a lot of cults. Children of God was the cult that Joaquin Phoenix's parents were a part of in the 70s. It started in the 1960s when a David Berg convinced enough people that there should be no limits with love, no matter the relationship status or age. And that never ends well. People who are part of it commonly describe it as hell on earth, with an incredibly abusive system that didn't shy away from brutal punishment. This is something we see in Outlast, where one cult member has his wife tortured on a medieval rack until the husband will share information regarding the location of Lynn.
Where is she?
Where did Val take her?
I can't.
This is for you,
Josiah. Make the woman scream.
What we also sometimes saw in Children of God was that people who had children, of course, wanted to leave the cult, but it wasn't that easy. If you play Outlast 2 to its completion, you know that when Blake finds his wife Lynn several hours after the crash, she's suddenly pregnant, and throughout this, what appears to be single night, Lynn goes through a full 9-month pregnancy. Noth's cult believes that these bizarre circumstances prove that she's pregnant with the Antichrist and tries to prevent her from giving birth. Now, relatively early on in the game, we see that there's actually another faction within this cult that fights Noth's followers and you as well.
I swear to f***ing Christ, the first person who touches me loses their eyes. God, no! God, no! God wants the child.
This different group is led by Val, who we meet shortly after the first time we reunite with Lynn. Throughout multiple in-game documents, we can understand who this character is as well. Val once worked closely with Noth and looked after Templegate's own children, but Noth forces her to kill very many of them. This bloodshed causes Val to question Noth, and she slowly changes her beliefs. To get away from the others, she digs tunnels to hide in where she and other people who have the same thoughts can meet up. This then leads to our group taking shelter in nearby abandoned mine shafts. Since there is this rift between Val and Noth and the fact that Val loves chaos, her side wants to make sure that the Antichrist inside Lynn is actually born and not killed by Noth. So you have Val fighting Noth about whether or not to kill Lynn's baby. By the way, with Val's people living inside the mines for so long, they slowly go insane to the point where they look like this and can barely speak. Of course, at the end, Blake helps Lynn deliver the baby, and once he does, Noth convinces all the cult members to consume cyanide-laced drinks, taking out everyone in the village because the Antichrist is now among them. And Noth also dies. By the way, the baby isn't technically real, but again, this is discussed in detail in the previous Outlast 2 video. One of the biggest parallels in this whole story is probably to the Jonestown deaths. In 1955, a cult was founded, called the People's Temple, run by a man named Jim Jones. He had anti-segregationist beliefs, which actually seemed like a good thing. He was anti-racism and believed in integration, but he gradually got more involved in controlling people's lives. About 900 members of his church then lived in a small town they created called Jonestown. Everything became more controlled, isolated, and abusive. After some disillusioned cult members alerted authorities about the group practicing mass unaliving, a concerned congressman named Leo Ryan visited this place, along with 3 journalists and 1 former member. They were all shot dead by the people of Jonestown, and afterwards Jim Jones ordered everyone to take a cyanide-laced drink. Cults are often not really something that we take too seriously or think about in our everyday life. Sometimes they're also kind of ignored or just accepted. I mean, honestly, I don't think about them very often. But Outlast 2, I think, in a relatively graceful manner, tries to bring attention to the insanity that in some cases is happening right in the United States. Again, all of this seems nuts, but the point is that there isn't any magical stuff going on here. Everything can be explained, even the strange things that are going on in the forest. With all the unprotected intercourse in the town, STDs ran rampant, with some people getting syphilis. This leads to the body being covered in sores and bumps, like we see here. How Noth explains this is that these people look the way they do because of their sins, which oddly enough might actually not be all that wrong. The people who suffer from this disease are outcast and are sent to live in the forest outside. By the way, Noth himself also suffers from these STDs, but he's able to keep his symptoms in check by having people go out in the normal world to buy him medication. And what these guys believe in is that they need to crucify the new Messiah, bury him, and then eat his flesh in order to get cured from their sickness. Would that help? Pretty sure it would hurt. This is why once Laird Byron says that you're the Messiah, one guy starts biting into your arm.
He's pure. He is the Skull Messiah. You half-wit dogs! He ain't been transubstantiated yet.
He knows that he should eat you to get cured, but he's doing it too early. That's why we get crucified and buried and all that nonsense by these people. One reason why these people think you're the Messiah is because you look normal and have a camera. What you record in their eyes is the new gospel. To summarize, Outlast 2 highlights the slippery slope that cult members can fall into. Agreement is cumulative, and if you start going down the wrong path, it might be too late once you realize that you're too far gone. Cults isolate their members so that they disconnect from the normal world and have no contact with it. Under these circumstances, it's easy to manipulate people. Again, even though this story is fictional, what we're seeing in the village could technically happen and already has happened to some degree. For you and me, it seems crazy because it's so different, but when you're isolated from society and surrounded by insanity, it slowly becomes everything you know and you stop questioning it. There are still some unanswered questions. One thing I find interesting are the parallels between Noth, Blake, and also Val to an extent. All these characters have one important trait in common: they lose faith. Blake being a Catholic Christian who loses faith after an incident in his religious elementary school. Then you have Noth, who was an evangelical Christian who doesn't find any comfort in the preachings he listens to while being in serious financial trouble. Then you have Val, who was an important member of Temple Gate, but eventually distances herself from Noth's beliefs. I don't quite know what to make of this yet, except for the game maybe trying to say that leaving your old beliefs behind can be difficult and come with longer lasting consequences. But if you guys have any ideas, I'd love to hear them. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Smash like, smash subscribe if you did. If you didn't like it, you can still leave a thumbs up. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.